Imagine waking up tomorrow and your thermostat reads negative 46 degrees Celsius. Not inside your house, outside. The air itself becomes a weapon. Every breath burns your lungs like swallowing broken glass. Your eyelashes freeze together within seconds. Exposed skin develops frostbite in under 5 minutes. Most modern humans would panic, retreat indoors, crank up the heating, and pray for spring. But thousands of years ago, in the Arctic regions of North America, entire civilizations thrived in these exact conditions. No central heating, no insulated walls, no Gore-Tex jackets or thermal underwear. Nothing that we would recognize as survival equipment. And yet, they did not merely survive, they flourished. They raised families, built communities, developed art, created spiritual traditions, and passed down knowledge through countless generations. How is this even possible? The Inuit, Yupik, Aleut, and other indigenous peoples of the far north developed survival technologies so sophisticated that modern science is only beginning to understand their genius. These were not primitive techniques born of desperation. They were precision-engineered solutions refined over millennia, tested against the harshest environment on Earth, and perfected through observation, experimentation, and intergenerational wisdom. This is the story of how human ingenuity conquered the impossible. This is the story of survival without shelter as we know it. This is the story of people who looked at negative 46 degrees and said, "We can work with this." The Arctic winter presents challenges that seem almost designed to kill humans. The sun disappears for months at a time, plunging the land into perpetual darkness. Temperatures routinely plummet below -40 degrees, a point where Celsius and Fahrenheit actually meet. Blizzards arrive without warning, reducing visibility to zero and disorienting even experienced travelers. The wind chill can push effective temperatures to -60 or -70 degrees. In these conditions, the human body faces immediate and lethal threats. Core temperature drops rapidly without protection. Blood vessels constrict, reducing circulation to extremities. The body begins to shut down non-essential functions to preserve the vital organs. Hypothermia sets in within minutes of exposure. Death follows shortly after. Modern survival experts recommend multiple layers of synthetic insulation, emergency shelters, heat sources, and immediate evacuation when temperatures drop this low. The standard advice is simple: do not stay outside, get indoors, find heat, wait for rescue. But what happens when there is no indoors? What happens when there is no rescue coming? What happens when this frozen wasteland is not a temporary emergency, but your permanent home? The indigenous peoples of the Arctic faced this reality every single day of every single winter for thousands of years, and they developed answers to questions that modern survival science is still struggling to fully comprehend. The first and most critical challenge was shelter. Not shelter as we understand it, with permanent foundations and solid walls. Mobile shelter, portable shelter. Shelter that could be constructed in hours, dismantled in minutes, and rebuilt wherever the hunt led. The igloo remains one of the most elegant engineering solutions in human history. Built entirely from compressed snow blocks, it exploits counterintuitive thermodynamic principles that seem almost magical to the uninitiated. Snow is an excellent insulator because it contains trapped air pockets that prevent heat transfer. When shaped into a dome, the structure becomes self-supporting, distributing weight evenly across its curved surface. But the genius runs deeper. The entrance tunnel sits lower than the main chamber, creating a cold trap. Dense cold air sinks and pools in the tunnel, while warmer air rises and remains trapped in the dome. A small oil lamp or even body heat from several occupants can raise the interior temperature to above freezing, sometimes reaching a comfortable 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, while the outside world howls at -50. The walls actually strengthen over time as the inner surface melts slightly from the warmth inside, then refreezes into a smooth ice layer that provides additional insulation and structural integrity. A well-built igloo can withstand Arctic storms that would destroy modern tents in minutes. An experienced builder can construct a functional igloo in about 90 minutes. Think about that. In less time than watching a movie, a skilled individual can create a shelter that transforms lethal cold into livable space, using nothing but the snow beneath their feet and a bone knife. The Inuit did not invent the igloo through random accident. They developed it through systematic observation of how snow behaves under different conditions, how heat moves through materials, how wind patterns affect structures, and how human bodies generate and retain warmth. This was applied physics practiced by people who had never heard the term, but understood the principles intimately. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because what you are about to discover in the next 5 chapters will fundamentally change how you understand human capability. This is knowledge that survived for millennia and almost disappeared. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss a single revelation. If the igloo represented external shelter, then Arctic clothing represented something even more sophisticated, a portable microclimate that moved with the body. The garments developed by northern indigenous peoples were not merely warm. They were complete environmental control systems that regulated temperature, managed moisture, and adapted to varying activity levels. The caribou parka stands as perhaps the finest cold-weather garment ever created by human hands. Modern outdoor gear manufacturers, with all their synthetic materials and laboratory testing, have never managed to surpass its performance in extreme Arctic conditions. The secret lies not in any single feature, but in an integrated system of design choices that work together in perfect harmony. Caribou fur contains hollow hairs filled with air, creating natural insulation that synthetic materials can only approximate. But the Inuit understood something more subtle. The fur must face the right direction. Inner layers were worn with the fur against the skin, trapping body heat directly. Outer layers were worn with the fur facing outward, shedding snow and ice while providing wind resistance. The double-layer system created a pocket of still air between the garments, dramatically increasing thermal protection. When the wearer became active and generated excess heat, this air pocket could be vented by loosening the clothing at strategic points. When the wearer rested and heat production dropped, the layers could be tightened to maximize insulation. This adaptive thermal regulation prevented a deadly problem that claims many modern Arctic travelers: sweating. When you exert yourself in extreme cold, your body still produces sweat. In modern synthetic clothing, this moisture often becomes trapped against the skin. When you stop moving, the moisture rapidly cools and can actually accelerate hypothermia. You freeze in your own sweat. The caribou parka avoided this through material properties and clever design. The fur naturally wickeded moisture away from the skin. Strategic openings allowed ventilation during high activity. The entire garment could be adjusted in seconds to match changing conditions. An Inuit hunter could sprint after prey, then stand motionless waiting at a breathing hole without ever becoming dangerously wet or cold. The hood design alone represents a masterpiece of thermal engineering. Wolverine fur lines the edge because it has a unique property. Frost from breath does not accumulate on it as readily as other furs. This means the wearer's face remains protected by clear, unfrozen fur rather than a stiff mask of ice. The hood creates a warm air pocket around the face while allowing peripheral vision, crucial for survival. Mittens rather than gloves protected hands because shared airspace between fingers provides better insulation than isolated digits. But the mittens were designed with the understanding that certain tasks require finger dexterity. Inner mittens could be worn alone for fine work, while outer mittens provided maximum warmth during exposure. Hunters could shed the outer layer, complete a delicate task, and restore full protection in moments. Footwear presented unique challenges. The feet touch the frozen ground constantly, losing heat through conduction. Moisture from perspiration accumulates in enclosed spaces. Cold feet lead to frostbite faster than almost any other body part. Modern insulated boots still struggle with these issues. The mukluk solved them all. Constructed from seal skin or caribou hide with fur lining, the mukluk included several removable insoles made from dried grass or caribou hair. These insoles absorbed moisture throughout the day and could be removed at night to dry while the wearer slept. Fresh insoles were inserted each morning, ensuring the feet started each day with dry, maximum insulation. The soft sole of the mukluk, so different from rigid modern boots, actually provided crucial advantages. It allowed the wearer to feel the snow and ice beneath their feet, detecting thin ice or unstable surfaces that could mean death. It flexed with the foot during movement, preventing the formation of pressure points that could restrict circulation. It gripped uneven terrain through conformity rather than tread patterns. Every single element of Arctic clothing reflected thousands of years of refinement. The cutting patterns minimized seams that could allow cold air penetration. The stitching techniques used sinew that swelled when wet, sealing needle holes against moisture. The decorative elements were not merely aesthetic, but often indicated the wearer's skills, family connections, and spiritual protections. A complete set of traditional Arctic clothing could weigh as little as 4 kilograms while providing protection that modern equipment cannot match, and it could be created entirely from materials found within the environment using tools made from bone, antler, and stone. No factories, no supply chains, no petroleum products, just intimate knowledge of animal biology, material properties, and human thermal needs. When European explorers first encountered the Arctic, many of them died. They brought wool clothing that absorbed moisture and froze solid. They brought leather boots that cracked in the cold. They brought attitudes of cultural superiority that prevented them from learning from the people who had mastered this environment for millennia. The explorers who survived were almost universally those who adopted indigenous clothing and techniques. They swallowed their pride and admitted that these supposedly primitive people had developed technologies that European science could not match. Here is a puzzle that seems impossible. How do you create and maintain fire in a land where no trees grow? The Arctic tundra stretches for thousands of kilometers without a single standing tree. Driftwood arrives sporadically on shores and is far too precious to burn regularly. Coal and natural gas deposits exist, but require industrial extraction. For most of human history in the Arctic, wood-based fire was simply not available. Yet the northern indigenous peoples not only survived, but thrived with a completely different approach to heat and light. They mastered fire without fuel as we understand it, using the very animals they hunted to provide warmth, illumination, and the ability to cook food. The kulik, a shallow stone lamp burning rendered sea mammal fat, stands as one of the most efficient heating systems ever devised for its context. Carved from soapstone, which retains heat beautifully and withstands thermal stress, the kulik held a reservoir of seal or whale oil with an Arctic cotton grass wick along one edge. This lamp produced a small, steady flame that burned clean and hot. A single kulik could heat an igloo to comfortable temperatures, provide light during the months of polar darkness, dry, wet clothing, and melt snow for drinking water. All from a device that fit easily in one hand and consumed only the rendered fat of animals hunted for food. The efficiency of this system deserves special attention. The seal or whale was hunted primarily for food. The fat, which might otherwise represent waste, became the fuel supply. The bones became tools and building materials. The sinew became thread. The skin became clothing and boat coverings. Nothing was discarded. Every part of the animal contributed to survival, and the heat and light were essentially free byproducts of the food supply. Leave a comment right now with the phrase, "Ancient wisdom never dies." If this knowledge is touching something deep inside you, if you are feeling what I am feeling as we explore how our ancestors mastered the impossible, leave that comment. Let me know you are here. Let me know this matters to you too. Modern heating systems require extensive infrastructure, fuel extraction, transportation networks, combustion equipment, ventilation systems. They consume resources that must be constantly replenished from external sources. They fail when supply chains break down. The kulik required only successful hunting and the knowledge of how to render fat and tend a flame. It was self-contained, portable, and utterly reliable as long as the hunt succeeded. It represented energy independence in the most profound sense. But the lamp was only part of the thermal equation. The indigenous peoples of the Arctic understood something that modern survival experts often emphasize. The best source of heat is the heat your body already produces. The goal is not to generate more heat, but to retain the heat you naturally create. This is why sleeping arrangements received such careful attention. Multiple people slept together under shared coverings, pooling body heat. Sleeping platforms were raised above the floor level, where cold air pooled. Bedding consisted of multiple layers of fur and hide that trapped air while allowing moisture to escape. The sleeping posture itself was optimized, drawing the knees up toward the chest, reduces the body's surface area relative to its volume, minimizing heat loss. Keeping the head covered retains warmth that would otherwise escape from this highly vascularized region. Even the direction of sleep was sometimes oriented to avoid drafts from entrance tunnels. During waking hours, activity generated heat that clothing systems retained. During sedentary periods, people gathered together, shared warmth, and minimized exposure. The rhythms of daily life were structured around thermal efficiency, active hunting during the coldest hours when movement prevented freezing, rest and social time during relatively warmer periods when stillness was safer. Food itself served as fuel. The traditional Arctic diet was extraordinarily high in fat and protein, providing the caloric density needed to maintain body heat in extreme cold. A modern person consuming 4,000 calories daily would typically gain weight rapidly. An active Arctic hunter in winter needed these calories simply to maintain body temperature while pursuing game across frozen landscapes. The preference for raw or minimally cooked meat, which outsiders often found shocking, made perfect thermal sense. Cooking requires fuel expenditure. Raw meat preserves all its caloric content. Certain nutrients, particularly vitamin C, are destroyed by cooking but preserved when meat is eaten raw or frozen. The traditional diet prevented scurvy in an environment with virtually no plant foods available during winter. Every element of Arctic life was designed around the reality of limited heat sources. Communities formed partly because shared living spaces required less heating than individual dwellings. Hunting practices emphasized maximum caloric return for caloric expenditure. Seasonal movements followed not just animal migrations, but also thermal opportunities, moving to more sheltered locations during the coldest periods. The mastery of fire without forests represents a fundamental reimagining of the relationship between humans and heat. Rather than fighting the cold with massive energy inputs, the Arctic peoples worked with their environment, using minimal external heat while maximizing the retention of body heat and harvesting thermal energy from the animals they ate. Survival in the Arctic required more than physical technologies. It demanded a sensory and cognitive mastery of an environment that seems utterly alien to most humans. The far north presents a landscape of apparent monotony: white snow, gray sky, featureless horizons stretching to infinity. To untrained eyes, it all looks the same. There are no landmarks, no obvious paths, no signs pointing the way home. Yet the indigenous peoples of the Arctic navigated this seemingly featureless world with precision that astonished European explorers. They traveled hundreds of kilometers across ice and tundra, found their way home through blizzards that reduced visibility to arm's length, and located specific hunting sites year after year across landscapes that appeared completely unmarked. How? They learned to read what outsiders could not see. Snow tells stories to those who know its language. The direction of wind-carved ridges reveals prevailing weather patterns. The texture of the surface indicates age, stability, and depth. The color variations, invisible to casual observation, distinguish safe ice from dangerous thin spots. The sound underfoot communicates information about what lies beneath. A skilled Arctic traveler could examine a stretch of snow and determine when it fell, how much wind had compressed it, whether it would support weight, and whether it concealed dangerous features. This knowledge was not written in any book. It was transmitted through direct experience, careful observation, and guidance from elders who had spent lifetimes accumulating wisdom. Star navigation required adaptation to polar conditions. The familiar constellations of temperate regions behave differently near the poles. Polaris, the North Star, sits nearly overhead rather than on the horizon. The circumpolar stars wheel in tight circles rather than rising and setting. The long polar night offers months of stellar observation, but also requires tracking time without the sun's obvious progression. Indigenous astronomers developed sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics, adapted to their specific latitude and viewing conditions. They tracked not just major stars, but subtle seasonal changes in star positions, planetary movements, and the timing of twilight that preceded the sun's eventual return. But perhaps the most remarkable navigational tool required no external references at all. Experienced Arctic travelers developed internal maps of extraordinary accuracy. mental representations of vast territories built through repeated travel and careful attention. These cognitive maps included not just locations, but temporal information. How long different routes took under various conditions, when ice typically formed and broke up, where animals appeared during specific seasons. The transmission of this knowledge from generation to generation represented one of humanity's great educational achievements. Children accompanied adults from early ages, learning through observation and gradually increasing participation. Specific teaching methods developed for communicating complex spatial and environmental information through story, song, and hands-on practice. Young hunters learned to read animal signs with the same intensity that modern children learn to read text. The track of a caribou revealed not just that an animal had passed, but its speed, direction, health, size, and how recently it traveled. Patterns in ice indicated seal breathing holes below. The behavior of birds signaled approaching weather or the presence of marine mammals. This environmental literacy extended to weather prediction. Changes in wind direction, cloud formation, animal behavior, and subtle atmospheric signs allowed experienced observers to forecast conditions hours or days in advance. In an environment where being caught unprepared by a storm could mean death, this predictive ability was literally life-saving. The contrast with modern technological approaches is striking. We navigate with GPS satellites that require massive infrastructure and can fail when batteries die or signals are blocked. We predict weather with supercomputers processing satellite data. We find our way using maps created by others and tools manufactured in distant factories. The Arctic peoples navigated using knowledge stored entirely in human minds, transmitted through human relationships, and requiring nothing but the environment itself and the training to perceive it correctly. This knowledge was robust against technological failure because it required no technology. It was resilient against supply chain disruptions because it depended on no supplies. It was sustainable across generations because it perpetuated itself through cultural transmission. The sophistication of indigenous environmental knowledge has only recently begun to receive scientific recognition. Researchers have found that traditional ecological knowledge often captures phenomena that Western science missed or misunderstood. The oral traditions contain information about animal populations, climate patterns, and environmental changes accumulated over centuries that complements and sometimes exceeds what instrumental records can provide. No individual could survive the Arctic winter alone. This is not merely a practical observation about task distribution. It is a fundamental truth about human biology and psychology that the northern peoples built into the very foundation of their social organization. Modern industrial societies celebrate individual self-reliance as a virtue. We admire people who need no help, who succeed through personal effort, who stand alone against challenges. This mythology of individualism collapses completely in extreme environments. The Arctic taught its inhabitants that survival requires community, and this lesson shaped every aspect of their social structure. Hunting large marine mammals required cooperation that no individual could accomplish. A single hunter might locate a whale or walrus, but harvesting an animal weighing several tons demanded coordinated effort from many people. The meat, fat, and other resources from such a kill could sustain a community for weeks, but only if the community existed to perform the kill and process the harvest. The sharing of food operated through complex but carefully understood protocols. Successful hunters distributed portions of their kills according to established patterns that ensured everyone received sustenance regardless of individual hunting success on any given day. This was not charity in the modern sense, but rather a sophisticated insurance system that recognized the inherent unpredictability of Arctic hunting. Today your hunt succeeds while your neighbor fails. Tomorrow the situation reverses. Over time, everyone experiences periods of abundance and scarcity. By pooling resources according to established rules, the community smoothed out these variations and ensured that temporary individual failure did not become permanent individual death. The social obligations of sharing extended beyond immediate family to encompass broader kinship networks and partnerships that created ties across vast distances. A hunter might have formal sharing relationships with partners in distant communities, creating networks of mutual support that provided options during local resource failures. Conflict resolution in these small, interdependent communities required approaches very different from the adversarial systems common in larger societies. When your survival depends on cooperation with everyone around you, prolonged feuds become literally suicidal. Indigenous Arctic societies developed sophisticated mechanisms for managing disagreements, restoring relationships, and maintaining the social cohesion necessary for collective survival. The treatment of elders particularly revealed the survival value of community. In harsh environments where food was sometimes scarce, elderly individuals who could no longer actively hunt might seem like a burden. Yet Arctic societies treasured their elders as irreplaceable repositories of knowledge. An elder who had survived 70 or 80 winters had witnessed climate variations, unusual weather events, and rare phenomena that younger members had never encountered. When strange conditions arose, the elder's memory might contain information about similar past events and how the community had successfully responded. This living library of environmental knowledge had survival value that far exceeded the food costs of supporting individuals past their productive hunting years. Children received intensive education not through formal schools, but through constant immersion in adult activities. Learning was embedded in doing. A child learned to sow by helping to sow. A child learned to hunt by accompanying hunters. A child learned the stories and songs that encoded survival knowledge by participating in their performance. The mental health implications of this social structure deserve attention. Modern societies face epidemics of loneliness, depression, and anxiety, partly because we have designed living patterns that isolate individuals from meaningful community connection. The Arctic peoples lived in close, constant contact with their community members. Privacy, as we understand it, barely existed, but neither did the crushing isolation that drives so many modern mental health crises. The long polar night, with its months of darkness, created conditions that might seem designed to produce seasonal depression. Yet traditional communities structured this time around intensive social activities, storytelling, singing, craft production, games, and ceremonies. The darkness became a time for strengthening social bonds rather than a period of solitary suffering. Spiritual practices wove through daily life, providing frameworks of meaning that connected individual struggles to larger purposes. The relationship between humans, animals, and the natural world was understood through spiritual concepts that gave significance to hunting, eating, and survival itself. Life had meaning beyond mere continuation, and this meaning supported psychological resilience in conditions of extreme challenge. The community functioned as a survival technology, as essential as clothing or shelter. Remove any individual from this social matrix, and they would quickly die, not only from physical challenges, but from the loss of distributed knowledge, cooperative labor, and psychological support that the community provided. The apparently simple societies of the Arctic were actually complex systems of interdependence, refined over thousands of years to sustain human life where human life should have been impossible. Everything described in the previous chapters almost disappeared. Within a few generations, the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years came terrifyingly close to extinction. The story of how this nearly happened, and how dedicated individuals are fighting to preserve what remains, contains lessons as important as the survival techniques themselves. European contact brought more than new technologies and diseases. It brought systematic pressure to abandon traditional ways. Children were removed from families and placed in residential schools where speaking indigenous languages was punished, where traditional knowledge was forbidden, where the explicit goal was to eliminate indigenous cultures and assimilate survivors into European-style society. A child who would have spent these years learning to read snow, track animals, build shelters, and sew clothing instead, sat in a classroom, learning to read English text and calculate with Arabic numerals. The knowledge that had kept their ancestors alive was not supplemented, but replaced. The chain of transmission that had stretched unbroken for millennia was deliberately severed. The results were devastating beyond the immediate trauma. Young people returned to their communities lacking survival skills. Elders died with knowledge they had never been permitted to pass on. Languages that encoded unique environmental concepts disappeared, as their last speakers passed away. Entire domains of understanding became extinct, leaving gaps that can never be fully reconstructed. This was not accidental, it was policy. The governments of Canada, the United States, and other nations deliberately targeted Indigenous knowledge systems for elimination. They understood, perhaps better than many modern observers, that cultural knowledge represented power, and that destroying this knowledge would transfer power from Indigenous communities to colonial authorities. The recognition of what was lost came slowly. As climate change began affecting the Arctic, researchers discovered that Indigenous knowledge contained information about environmental variability that instrumental records could not provide. As synthetic materials revealed unexpected limitations, the superiority of traditional clothing designs became apparent. As modern people faced mental health crises linked to social isolation, the psychological benefits of traditional community structures attracted attention. Today, a movement to revive and preserve traditional knowledge fights against time. Elder knowledge keepers work with researchers to document techniques, stories, and concepts before they are lost forever. Language revitalization programs try to save endangered tongues that encode unique ways of understanding the world. Young people seek out traditional skills, learning to build igloos, sew parkas, and navigate by natural signs. This is not mere nostalgia or cultural preservation for its own sake. Traditional Arctic knowledge contains practical wisdom of immediate relevance to contemporary challenges. Climate change affects the Arctic faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. The techniques for reading ice conditions, predicting weather, and adapting to environmental variation offer tools for responding to unprecedented changes. The sustainable harvesting practices developed over millennia provide models for resource management that industrial approaches have failed to match. Modern survival equipment fails in conditions where traditional gear succeeds. Modern navigation systems require infrastructure that traditional methods transcend. Modern social structures produce loneliness that traditional communities prevented. The old ways are not obsolete relics, but proven solutions to problems we are still struggling to solve. The indigenous peoples of the Arctic achieved something remarkable. They took one of the most hostile environments on Earth and made it their home. They did not survive through brute force or luck, but through careful observation, systematic experimentation, and accumulated wisdom transmitted across countless generations. They developed technologies that we are only now beginning to fully appreciate, and knowledge systems that our science is still working to understand. Their story deserves to be told not as a romantic tale of primitive life, but as an account of human achievement equal to any in our species' history. The Apollo program put humans on the moon through the coordinated efforts of thousands of engineers over a decade. Indigenous Arctic survival sustained human life in conditions nearly as extreme through the coordinated efforts of entire cultures over thousands of years. We almost lost this knowledge, we still might lose what remains. But every person who learns these stories, who shares them with others, who supports the communities keeping this wisdom alive, contributes to ensuring that future generations can still access this extraordinary heritage. The cold that would kill unprepared modern humans in minutes became home to thriving civilizations. The darkness that would drive many into despair became a season of deep social connection. The environment that appears as empty wasteland to untrained eyes became a rich landscape full of meaning, resources, and opportunity to those who learned to read it correctly. This is what humans are capable of when we apply our full intelligence to the challenge of survival. This is what we stand to lose if we allow this knowledge to disappear. This is why these stories matter, why they deserve to be told, why they deserve to be remembered. If you watched this far, it is because you liked this case. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. The Arctic peoples looked at -46 degrees and built lives of meaning, community, and even abundance. They did not merely endure their environment, but mastered it, developed relationships with it, and passed on knowledge that allowed their descendants to do the same. Modern humanity faces unprecedented challenges: climate change, resource depletion, social fragmentation, loss of meaning. The indigenous peoples of the Arctic faced challenges equally severe, and developed solutions that worked for thousands of years. Their wisdom has much to teach us, if we are humble enough to learn. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about human resilience. Hit the like button to help others discover this story. The knowledge of our ancestors deserves to be known. What they achieved without modern technology puts our accomplishments in perspective. What they preserved for millennia, we nearly destroyed in generations. What remains still offers guidance for challenges we are only beginning to face. The story of survival at -46 degrees is not over. It continues in the communities keeping this knowledge alive, in the researchers documenting what remains, in every person who learns and shares these stories. It continues perhaps in you. The cold remains, the wisdom endures, the human capacity for ingenious adaptation persists in every one of us. The Arctic peoples proved what we are capable of when we truly commit to understanding our world and our place within it. May their knowledge live forever. May we prove worthy of preserving it.